This is the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud podcast. My name's Andrew James and with me today is
Sarah Bolt.
How are you going, Sarah?
I'm really good, thank you, Andrew. How are things with you this week?
Yeah, not too bad. Let's be honest, it's been a bit up and down for me recently on a personal level, and I suppose I feel I've not apologise. I don't think that's quite the right word, but when we get into the main podcast, I do leap suddenly into let's talk about sudden death. And so to anybody, I'm just giving you a bit of a warning. Listening back, it was a bit blunt, but it was very much because my mother-in-law died quite suddenly recently after a short illness. She got everything in line, bless her, but it was still like, it was in my mind and I was just like, where do we start? Bang. And so just a bit of a word of warning there for anybody. But otherwise, yeah, not too bad. I mean, as I say that, this is a bit of a difficult subject sometimes for people, isn't it?
It is a very difficult subject. I think it's the thing that probably people find most hard to talk about. It's not only is it a difficult conversation, but it's actually a difficult. Can't say that without stuttering. It's a difficult conversation to have with family. Sort of other difficult conversations perhaps tend to be with staff, but this one's with close family and perhaps makes it that much harder.
I'd say it probably does make it that much harder, but it is making often it's that it's what we dread will happen, and often it's not the case. It's once you've made that initial start, it's not as bad as you think it is, and yeah, I tell myself that quite often. But so yeah, let's go talk to our guests about succession and retirement. This podcast has been brought to you today by Chewing the Cud Limited, who offer completely independent dairy and beef nutrition, cow signals advice and training, along with ROMS mobility scoring. For more details on these and other services available, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on nutrition@chewingthecud.com. Chewing the Cud Limited now offers first aid training from a registered first aid at work trainer and experienced minor injuries practitioner. For more details, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on training@chewingthecud.com. Hello, I'm Andrew Jones.
And I'm Sarah Bolt.
And welcome to the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry.
Farmer, advisor, processor, and everyone else. We have topics and episodes that will interest you.
We discuss the practical and the technical aspects of different UK dairy industry topics.
We aim to make you think about what you're doing and ask yourself, can it be done differently?
Listen to us speak with specialists from inside and outside the industry about their area of expertise.
Subscribe and listen to episodes for free on your favourite podcast platform.
Sign up to our website, www.chewingthecud.com, for podcast notifications so you never miss an episode.
And links to our socials, including Instagram, Chewing the Cud Podcast, all one word, and remember, no G.
Or email us direct on podcast@chewingthecud.com.
If you like what we do, please share and leave us a review to show your support. And that's it. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello and welcome back to Chewing the Cud podcast, and our guests today are Willem Puddy and Philip Kirkpatrick, both partners from Old Mill Accounting. Good afternoon to you both.
Afternoon, Andrew. Afternoon.
Afternoon.
How are you both?
Very good, thank you.
Good. Well, we're here to talk a little bit about succession planning and maybe some things we should be looking at. I know we've talked a little bit about succession planning in the past when we had Catherine and Nathan come on talking about what they were talking about in their particular farm. But we're looking at it more from a bigger, broader picture with the two guys from Old Mill. But before we start, like usual, Willem, tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Well, slightly unusual sort of path I taken. I grew up on a family farm in Wiltshire, Codford, just off the A36. Mum and dad are sort of arable farmers there with quite a bit of diversification off of 300 acres. I actually went away and played football for 10, 12 years, a professional football player. Not at a hugely high level, but was a level where I knew I had to do something after. And obviously having a love for the rural community, I studied while I was playing, so that when I decided to stop, I joined Old Mill, went through the normal sort of exams to become a chartered accountant, and worked myself to the position where I am at the moment, being sort of the trusted advisor on a portfolio of rural clients in and around our offices in Chippenham.
So how high did you get in football?
I played at League One, was the highest I played.
Okay, so still reasonable.
Yeah.
Any teams we might have heard of?
So I played Bristol Rovers, Cheltenham, Salisbury.
So local teams, really, but still good. Philip, yourself, how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so Willem did the more exciting route, going off and playing professional football. I did the more traditional route of my father was a farmer in Somerset with my uncle, and classically they sadly fell out and the farm got sold, and so I devoted myself to trying a little bit at school, going off to university at Exeter, and then joining Old Mill after then, and I've been there ever since, really. So 17 years and counting.
So, but certainly both got the rural background and understanding of what a lot of your clients are dealing with them.
Yes.
Yeah. So, as I said, we're here to talk about succession. I know this came off the back of, you've had a couple of articles recently published, wasn't it? I think in the Farming Press talking about this. So we thought we'd talk about this in further detail. I guess it's where do you start? There's all sorts of things you could start at. I'll start with a worst case scenario, because this is a little bit poignant for me at the moment, because unfortunately my mother-in-law passed away quite suddenly recently. Sudden death. If there's no plan, where'd you go?
After you, Willem.
After me. Well, where we are today, if we're a farmer, first and foremost, we need to understand what that person owns.
Yep.
What is in their estate. So it's the sudden death. It is obviously very emotional time for individuals as well. So I know Phil have the same sort of opinion, but we have lots of procedures within Old Mill to ensure that we're taking care of some of the business side of it. If you're a partnership, that means that sometimes if you're a two-person partnership, that could mean a partnership is ceasing. And the other person comes as sole trade. So it's just understanding your own personal situation if it's sudden death. If we're talking succession, then we've also got to think, well, what's the tax rules at the point of death? So unfortunately, in your circumstances, using your mother so recently, is if they were a farmer, I don't know your personal situation.
No. My mother-in-law was retired teacher, so nothing farming-wise in that regard.
Yeah, but you just need to understand their estate and whether they qualify for certain reliefs. In the farming world, it's much better. This is a terrible way of talking, but from a relief point of view, the reliefs are much better now than what they will be come 6th of April next year.
I mean, I know I've thrown you both in the deep end with that, and apologies for that, but let's take a step back then. Really, the whole point of this is we're trying not to make today's discussion political, because obviously there has been a bit of upset in the last year with some of the changes that are coming in 2026. But really, the whole point of this is to make people think about what they're doing, aren't they? So that then when the time does come, it's even if it is sudden death, there is a plan in place so people know what the go is. And we're here to make people think about what they're doing. It's an awkward situation. Most people do not like talking about money, do not like talking about death, do not like talking about the next step, what happens. But really, we should the point of this is to make people think, isn't it? And have maybe an annual review or whatever it happens to be, and have plans in place, whether it's wills, whether it's whatever it happens to be. So, I mean, in an ideal situation, I'm going to pick on you this time, Phil, because you handed it over to Will last time. What would you ideally have a client have to be to be focused, and when the moment occurs, everything's in place for it to happen?
Yeah, that's fine. I think there's sort of different stages. So, I mean, there's sort of legal and financial kind of aspects, which sort of Willem and I would probably get a little bit more involved in. But actually, a lot of it is around more the practical management of the business, and whether there is someone actually in place who can effectively pick up the reins should someone no longer be there, whether that's sort of died, unfortunately, or incapacitated. And obviously, with that side of it, that's less of us being able to assist with that, really. It's more about encouraging people to think forwards on that basis. I mean, farming is ultimately one of the most dangerous professions there is. And having sort of a backup plan should things go wrong is not a bad thing. I mean, hopefully everyone would, on every farm, there'd hopefully be two people who kind of knew how most things work. That's probably not the case, I suspect.
I would say with some that's not the case.
No, but I think I remember on one client they said, "Oh, I hope nothing happens to Dad, because Dad's the only one who knows where all the water mains and everything is in the farm," and so on and so on. And because they built it, there was so much ingrained knowledge that hadn't been passed on to the next generation. So that, I think, is one thing. So our encouragement on that side is really to get the families talking. And then on the financial aspects, yeah, I mean, it's having the paperwork in place to make sure it's all facilitated. I mean, probably one of the worst things is if they don't have a will or the will's wrong. That could be pretty nightmare scenario.
Well, we all know of those farming stories, even locally, that, you know, it was ended up in High Court, whatever, because different people have fought the will, and it just makes it a mess for everybody, doesn't it, involved?
It does. And I suppose we always encourage clients to kind of review their will or other documents sort of periodically, just to make sure that they are still correct. Because, you know, a wrong will can be as bad as not having one. Yeah, so it can be a bit of a nightmare. And unfortunately, we probably all, like you say, had seen or had experiences of that scenario. And it can ultimately mean the death of the farm or the death of the business.
It's an important one as well, isn't it, Phil? That is the amount of clients that we sort of almost take on where none of this is set up is amazing. I sat with lawyers yesterday, and they reckon 50% of people don't have a will.
Huge statistics, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're thinking, well, it's sort of craziness, because Andrew mentioned things ending up in court, and the amount that farming families would have to pay in that scenario is astronomical. And yes, there is a cost to the planning that we're talking about, but it's sort of a necessary cost. Yeah,
it's one of those difficult ones.
Important.
It's one of those difficult things, isn't it? Because it reminds us that we're not actually immortal, and that you know, we will drop off this earth at one time. And I think, you know, however, the older you get, the more you think about it like that, and if I don't address it, then it's easier not to address it than to address my.
And I think that's going back to Andrew's original sudden death question. That's the problem with a sudden death, is there is no time to sort anything out effectively. So that is one of those problems. People do need to think about it earlier than they think.
Yeah, I suppose sorry, Andrew, I was going to say that's probably one positive that is coming out of all these discussions at the moment, is that there are discussions being had.
So we can thank Rachel Reeves for something, then, is what you're trying to say.
No, I can't. I'm not saying that at all.
You are right, though. It's having that discussion, because so nobody enjoys it. And like you're saying, if it ends up in court, that's going to cost a lot more than having pre-planned and put it in place to start with, isn't it? Now, whether that means you've got to review the will whenever, or, as you say, like you're talking about the water lines and stuff, maybe some stuff needs to be recorded so that then everybody
knows what the go is with certain stuff. But we all know that there's, I just take myself and my own little business. The only one that probably knows how all this stuff is in my head. And well, that's no good for anybody else if something suddenly happens to me. And it's no different, is it really?
Not really. And I think the other important thing is, so it's not just having the paperwork all in order, it is having those open discussions with your family. Because I think we've seen many cases where perhaps some of the younger generation of them, they're not young anymore. They've put 20, 30 years into this business, but perhaps never really actually had an idea what their parents were planning to do with it. And that again can cause problems. Whereas if they knew from the off, for example, that they were going to get the farm or only going to get a slice of the farm, they can make an informed decision about what they want to do with their future. And as difficult as that might be to address at the time, at least people can go into, they can make an informed decision with it and, go into whatever they agree with their eyes wide open, effectively.
Well, I was going to say, even if they need to bring in a third party, we're not necessarily talking about you guys, but whoever it happens to be, just to act as a mediator in those initial discussions, isn't it? So that everybody can bring to the table what they do and don't want, try and thrash out what they want, to then come to the likes of yourselves or the solicitor or whoever it happens to be, to then go, right, this is our plan, we want to put it in place, and for then obviously you to offer advice, this is good, bad, indifferent, whatever it happens to be. But sometimes just use an external moderator, mediator is the word I'm looking for, sorry, an external mediator to adjudicate. That's the right word, between all the different parties.
Facilitate.
Yes.
We like that word. Yes.
Facilitate. Yes. to chair a family meeting, whatever it happens to be, to try and draw out of everybody what their expectations are, what the outcomes are going to be, so that then something can happen positive to then move forward, to use the likes of yourselves to make that plan come into action.
Phil's point around the openness is massive, because I'm sure Phil's seen it as well, that we see it probably too regularly, and it's something that we encourage not, that they don't know what happens, and then you see the impact emotionally on the people who maybe got less than what they thought they're going to get. It might have been justified by mum and dad, but mum and dad are not about, or they might not be about at that point in time, to explain their reasoning. So they will pick their own reasonings why they ended up like it, and it might be completely different to what actually was the reasoning mum and dad had it in that scenario.
I always remember Sian Bushell. She was always one of that I think sort of brought succession planning, I think, to the forefront of my mind some years ago. And I remember listening to her speak once, and sort of talking about that that fairness doesn't necessarily mean equitable, and really trying to understand that. And I think within families, parents might think that actually splitting it equally is the right way. But if one of the siblings had been working on the farm for many years and the other two perhaps hadn't, there doesn't seem much fair about that, does it?
You led into the very question I was going to say. Well, if you have, I was going to say 2-3 siblings, and one's worked their life on the farm and the others haven't. I mean, that can cause problems if it's not addressed.
Yeah, well, we have it regularly in that situation, but I like to sort of call it sweat equity, where someone's worked their life's work on the farm, and I think it's, if you have those open discussions straight away, that generally most people are in agreement where the succession should lie, but it's just making sure that the other people are sort of provided for in a way that they feel adequate at the same time.
I think Andrew, I was just going to add, I think 2 quick points. So I think one of the ones is a lot of the times with a lot of family farms is if they haven't had that kind of thought process early, the older generations quite often will just pile any profit they happen to make back into the farm, which by the time they then get to the point where they're trying to look at succession, they've got this great big asset, which at the moment is generally quite valuable, doesn't necessarily earn anywhere near a sensible return on that value, but it's not divisible without sort of breaking the farming business. So I had a client recently, and actually they made some quite early provisions, and what that meant was they were drawing money away from the farm each year, but the farm just budgeted accordingly. So, it just planned it. And then by the time they got to succession, they were able to divide their assets up in what they felt were a fair manner without then being detrimental to the business.
Well, I was going to say, there's ways to do it, isn't there? Because I know myself, I was still farming, knowing what the will was at the time. I put a life insurance policy on my father so that there was a chunk of money to go to my sister. And then if he passed, obviously still alive, so hadn't, that money would have been there ready to pay her without it affecting the business, and the business could just carry on as it was. So, I mean, there are ways and means to look after some of these provisions, isn't there?
Life insurance, I always think of it as a bit of a kind of pay-as-you-go kind of option. So, yes, it's a something that you or your business is going to have to fund as you go. But if you've got enough foresight to take it out at a relatively young and healthy age, it's actually incredibly cost-effective. It's just most people, when they're at that age, don't really want to think about life insurance, to be frank. So, but I think certainly since last year's budget, life insurance questions with the younger generation now, with all the succession planning that's going on, very much at the forefront, because we all know that if these rules are here to stay, then there are some potentially quite large tax liabilities in the future, whether it's many, many years down the road or whatever. And actually, you can get some pretty good life cover out, less than £100 a month for some pretty hefty cover for if you're pretty young. And it is quite a cost-effective way at the end of the day of managing. But unfortunately, for those who are in advanced years now, it's now can't get the insurance or it's too expensive.
But it's a way to ensure that there's or a way to cover money to pay out a sibling or whatever it is without affecting the business as it stands, isn't it?
Yeah. Every situation is so unique, isn't it? So it's just making sure you're taking everything into account in your certain situation. But the life cover is definitely a tool we're using in the toolbox as part of the succession planning we're doing at the moment.
So you spoke about others perhaps setting profits aside. Are there any other ways that you can suggest that people can start planning early on?
I don't know what Phil's talking about specifically himself, but I've spoken a lot with clients around pensions, and I know pensions do get caught it come 2027 in the inheritance tax the calculation. But it's sort of another way of putting stuff away so that if you're talking another generation down the line, so we've got over one hurdle and we've got the gifts out of the way, and then we're talking the next generation, and when they're in their 60s, actually starting to remove the pressure from the need from income from the farm because they've built up a pension over time, and then actually use the pension pot. So the idea is it doesn't get you don't have a value of it to go into your own estate. It allows the next generation, again at a very early stage, to sort of take the farm on without having to pay mum and dad their own salary. It might even encourage people that you're saying to them, well, I'm going to put away into a pension so that you will have the full reins of the farm and the income of the farm because I've adequately provided for myself outside of the farm.
I mean, in an ideal situation, I know everyone's situation is different, etc., but if you look at it, people worry about maybe, like you talked about, a 7-year rule, didn't you, just then sort of briefly passing things on. In an ideal situation, when you talk about pensions, you live till you're 80. I guess you could say the answer is as soon as possible, but at what stage should you be looking at different steps along that journey in terms of pensions, maybe life insurance, handing it over? Because people are afraid if they hand the assets over, it might save them tax on the 7-year rule, then they might lose control of things. And I guess that's where a pension might come in because you're ensuring that you've still got that income thing in. Is there sort of a timeline where you go, well, in an ideal world, in your 20s, you should be looking at this, in your 40s, you should be looking at this, and in your 60s, you should be looking at that? Or am I just pulling something out of the air and go, well, that's never going to happen?
I think pensions, I'm not financial planner or advisor, so I definitely can't advise on any sort of financial side of it, but it is sensible to do pensions as early as you possibly can. I think the old idea that the farm's my pension needs to be sort of really challenged at the moment. And you got to sort of set it aside. But when you're going through the succession planning at the moment, I think it's extremely important that you are setting a plan or family plan. If this is a generational farm in place now, where we are gifting the farm in our 60s, the next generation. Therefore, if we are taking life insurance out now, we can take out term insurance till we're 75. Thereby, by 65, 66, 67, we've gifted what we needed to and started to draw on our pension. We are therefore technically retired, inverted commas, because I know no farmer retires. So, but ultimately, we've taken ourselves away from the asset burden in our estate, hopefully by the time we're 75. And if we haven't, then we have the insurance to back us up. And also we've taken away the pressure of to have to draw.
I think the biggest problem really, and we may as well say it because we all know it's an issue, is the fact that most farmers want to buy land. Typically, land is quite an expensive asset that actually doesn't produce enough income for what it is. And so the problem you tend to get is people pile money into buying the bit of land next door or wherever they want. And the problem is income. That's the problem. So whether it's income in your retirement, income during the lifeline of your business, if there's enough income somewhere, then as Willem says, people can then make the decisions to hand things on. The problem is if you hand things on, you have to give up the right to the income generated from it. So the problem in farming as a whole is it's the amount of income in relation to the value of the asset. That's a huge problem. And that pretty much all the tax and finance issues stem from that one issue. I mean, the reason the inheritance tax is such a problem is for that reason. We got high value assets that just don't produce enough income at the end of the day. If each farm was getting a 20% return on the value of their farm, they'd probably just pay the tax, to be frank, because there'll be a lot more money washing around. But it's just so low, it's so problematic.
I mean, if you had a pot of money looking at return on investments, there's no way that you'd go into farming, is there? Just purely at a return on investment point of view. Whether you had no passion to own land or whatever, but just from that nobody would accept the returns that farming appears to be giving.
Not the financial returns anyway.
No.
I was going to say, I'm probably showing my age. I remember when we sold up in 97 before we moved to Oz, I had to do all the paperwork to assign, the milk quota to the plots of land for my father, because obviously I had a computer, I knew how to use it. And it's like, what was the land? £3,000 an acre or something? Well, I mean, that's 20, not quite 30 years ago. And where is it now? It's more than quadrupled in price, probably as an average land price, hasn't it?
Yeah. But when we're having our succession conversations, I mean, okay, the problem you get, if there's multiple children who want to farm, then you've got issues of how you divide up this asset. Some of them have got more than one farm, which then makes it quite easy. But for others, if there's one central sort of farmstead, if you like, it can be quite hard to divide up. But most of the problems, Willem, I don't know about you, that we have apart from that is income. It's kind of, well, okay, we want to give this away because of the tax, but actually mum and dad need the income for their retirement, to be frank. And
to challenge that point as well, do we think that we've got to that position because of everyone holding on the assets longer? Like if we reverse back 20 years and say you have people in their 80s and 90s holding the asset, if they gave away the asset 20 years ago, or they were having conversations with the next generation 30 years ago, that you've got to, where we are now, if we've sorted the first generation out, that you've got to drive an income from this asset, and we've got to diversify to get two families rather than one family or three families fed off of this land. Would we have those sticky situations with income? We might still have it.
I'm going to throw a spanner in the works there, because I was thinking about this and we're talking about death. But from what you were just saying, Will, divorce. Maybe is that one of the reasons why the older generation don't want to hand it down, because they're afraid of divorce, and if that happens, it then splits the assets. How does that fit into it all? Because that's still a succession. It's just in a different way, maybe. I mean, where does that fit into things?
I was just going to say it's definitely a reason why people haven't taken action. That, I think the combination between that and the fact that the inheritance tax reliefs were so generous before has meant that they have been able to avoid that problem.
Yeah.
So if they don't hand it on,
Can I ask Bill a question? And I'm going to ask Bill a question, but do you think, Phil, that I've been talking to clients recently that we're going to ignore policy moving forward? Because the trust almost feels like the trust is gone in policy, that even if lots of clients are saying, well, if the next government comes in, it could get back to 100%, but that could be 5 years, 10 years, all of a sudden we could be back to where we are today in 15 years. So do you think we're in a place now that we're just going to be set in succession for the rest of time, effectively?
I think what you'll find is, so we've got different generations who some of them are having to take quite urgent action because of their health or age. I think those generations that perhaps have more time on their hands, probably, yeah, you're probably right, Willem. They're probably less focused on the tax, but more just putting in the adequate, like life insurance is a classic example as fallback plans. So many of them are actually taking out life insurance, not necessarily to support other non-farming members, but also just to cover tax, to be frank. So yeah, I do think that there are a lot who I've spoken to who are not rushing out and doing anything because it's just not the right time to hand assets on to their children for whatever reason. Sometimes it's because they're going through a difficult patch with their spouse.
Which I suppose is when trusts come into play a bit then.
You might turn around, you're in your 60s, I should be handing it over, but you might go, well, my kids are now, I don't know, let's say mid-30s. Is it going to idle? And that sort of delays and some of the choices being made that in an ideal world should be made.
Yeah, well, yeah, there comes a point, doesn't there, where you've got to make a mind up on those decisions, and it is hard. I definitely agree with you that if you've got children in your 30s and you don't know whether marriage is always going to be sort of stable, but that is where we are doing work with trusts where you can put the gift that you would be passing down to children, you're now setting it into a trust.
So explain trusts.
So trusts effectively are just a piece of paper.
Isn't everything?
Yeah. And rather than gifting or passing it down a generation, you can put elements into trust. They're extremely technical sort of part of planning. And I'm increasingly seeing people wanting to keep things simple. So it's not something we sort of actively go out and sort of promote. It's something that we use for certain circumstances, but it's effectively ring fencing an asset. People like to talk about it protecting the family silver, where you can put the asset in there, control the asset by being a trustee who looks after the asset within the trust, i.e. farmland, and then you can name beneficiaries who will be the beneficiary of the said income or asset within the trust at discretion, if it's a discretionary trust, of the trustees.
What are the tax?
I think, well, I was just going to say, sorry, Andrew, I was just going to say, I mean, there are lots of different types of trusts. I think the main thing is that they're really where you divorce the control of the asset, which is typically managed by people you appoint as trustees, versus the to be frank, the benefits of that asset. So there's a really simple level, which is if you set up a child's bank account, for example, legally that money sits in your name, but it's the child's money. That is a form of trust. And there are more complicated versions, as sort of Willem's saying. I mean, typically we're looking at sort of what we call life interest trusts or discretionary trusts, which again doesn't allow the beneficiary direct access to the land to be able to decide to sell it and those sort of decisions, but they are entitled to the income and potentially ultimately having the land in the future. But depending on what sort of trust you got, they're not in control of when potentially that happens.
So what are the limitations on trusts then? Because it sounds like what you're saying is they might not be able to sell something, or is it, I guess, all the trustees have got to agree to a sale, is it? Or where are the limitations on it? I guess what are the tax implications?
Yeah, there's tax implications going into trust. So which all depends on when you're going to do it. This side of April next year will make a big difference. But then from then onwards, there are tax every 10 years, so periodic 10-year charges. So is there the sort of downside? It comes with another administration cost. You've got to have, like you mentioned, trustees. You've got to pick trustees. Sometimes you can end up with professionals as trustees as well. That comes with another cost. So that it can make things more costly, more complex, less simple. And so there's got to be reasons for that. The benefits have got to outweigh the sort of negative side of those trusts. Yeah,
I think it's probably with the changes to the inheritance tax that are sort of coming in, there's a lot of appetite for setting up trusts because they look quite beneficial from an inheritance tax. But kind of as Willem just said at the end there, that they've got to fit the circumstances right, because you can end up tying loads of things up into trusts and setting various different people as trustees. And it might just make actually managing and running that business quite tricky at some stages. So classic one is if you fragment all the ownership, banks struggle to lend money sometimes, or it's not that they can't do it, it's just a lot more complicated. And so it just we can't let we shouldn't say this as accountants, but we definitely should say it. We shouldn't let tax be the determining factor on a lot of these decisions. And I think that's probably the right thing to say for succession is tax shouldn't be the driver for succession. It should be everything else that's going on.
And that's the same as just ordinary incomes, isn't it? That actually plan to pay some tax, some income tax, and then you'll probably be even more profitable. And I guess it's the same with this, that if you plan for it, you can then work better to achieve it.
Yeah. I like to always say I like to sort of start with families and say that we need to have a family plan, a family direction, your idea of your mediation and going away and having discussions to start with, to have an end goal in sight, and then getting your advice is a really, really good place to start. Because then what you're doing is, like Phil says, you're not thinking about the tax. You're thinking about what you think is the best for the family, and then you can get the advice to see whether there's a specific way you should go that is tax efficient for.
Well, I was going to say, dare I say it, we should maybe look at tax as a positive. I know in my first year in business, I got the accounts done. And I said to the accountant, I'm going to have to pay too much tax. And it was literally nothing. Don't get me wrong. And she went, well, look at it as a good thing. It means you made money. You've been successful. You're doing all right at what you're doing if you've got to pay tax. So, we all hate it, but it's the way to look. It's maybe a positive way to look at it.
Well, I do sort of say that to a lot of people. And I think from a sort of tax on sort of profit point of view, I mean, the main thing is just understanding when it will hit and planning ahead for it. And if there are ways of mitigating it, knowing them in advance so you can decide whether you want to do them or not. I think the difficulty, though, on the tax point is for your working farmer who isn't looking to cash in on their farm, that it's created a huge inheritance tax burden now with the new rules coming in, but it's not actually benefited them in any way until they want to realise those assets, which for most of them, they don't want to do because they wanted to go down through successive generations. And I think that's, again, coming back to it, is what, is the problem really is to the family business, whether it's farming or another asset-heavy family business. It's an issue, really, because there might be tax leakage at every death, for argument's sake, and there might not be much of a business left after.
I know. I think it's before we start. I said I don't want to make this political, but you've just made me, and I don't want to. But like you've just said there, a perfect example. I know a client of mine said, he said, "Look, I don't have a problem paying tax if we want to sell the farm at the death, because then, okay, if we've got to pay capital gains or whatever, yeah, fair shout, we'll pay it." But he said the point is we want to keep going, and if we've suddenly got to pay 20% of our assets out this thing, he said it's just going to cripple the business. And I wouldn't argue they're a big business, I don't know what, off the top of my head, I think they're like 150 cows, 600 acres. They've got a fair bit of arable, but he said it's going to hit our business really hard. And it's just, as he said, I'm quite happy if I pay tax, I've got to pay it, but let me pay it at the appropriate time, which is, as you say, when you want to cash the assets out, but they don't want to because they want to keep farming.
Yeah, you've been. It feels farmers feel like they've been punished because of land inflation, of the cost of land, and it's my dad, when he bought the farm, he didn't buy it thinking it would increase in value to where it was today. He would never have sold it the whole way through it. He would never sell it at all. And if the farm was worth the same as what he bought, he would still be doing the same thing. So it, like you say, it's come, it's sort of crept up on farmers over the last sort of 30 years. And that's why it stings so hard. And I think there were simpler ways to deal with it on your individual.
I'd probably say more than the last 30 years. I mean, I know I use that as an example, but again, I sort of take back to my grandparents when they bought the farm in the 60s. I think it was the farmhouse, the buildings, like 120 acres, I think £25,000, which, I mean, that would be my grandparents. If I was still farming now, obviously we went to Oz and whatever, but, third generation on that farm, then that'd be a hell of a markup from what that value was then back in the mid 60s to where it is now. And that would not be untypical of many farms.
No, it is right. And it's I had a conversation with my parents where they bought a field 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And they were their first generation farmers. So they bought the farm, what would have been, it would have been 35 years ago now. And before they bought the farm, they bought a field, and they bought the field as he was a farm manager, which was next door to our grandparents. And they managed within a couple of years to pay the loan off that bought that field. Like, you just can't do that these days. So there was a route into agriculture. My dad's probably the last generation that could probably do it for a minute, where they had to beg, borrow, and steal to get some of it, to get the deposit down to do it. But they've managed to do that. I don't think you can go buy a 300-acre farm just being a farm manager these days. And I think that is sort of where another problem is coming.
Well, I think the other thing is so the land inflation. It's not farming that has created the land inflation. It's things outside of farming. Now, yes, undoubtedly some farmers have benefited from that. But when you think about it, the inheritance tax rules have probably impacted inflation in land, plus things like development and so on. But it is an ever-reducing commodity is farmland. And for some people for the incredibly wealthy out there, they can afford to sink incredibly large sums of money into it. Even these current rules where they're cutting the inheritance tax relief from 100% over $1 million down to 50%. I mean, if your option is paying full rate inheritance tax or chucking a load of money into farmland and pretending to farm for 2 years and still getting 50% relief, I mean, you can save colossal amounts of tax, and and the system is not right, to be frank, to allow that.
You do say it though, Willem. I'd argue it's been longer than that, because I certainly would remember. What am I now, 50? So, 35 years, 40 years ago, it was, where's the next generation coming from? Because it was milk quota, having to pay for things, not just the farm, but having to pay for milk quota, relative to it. It's, I'm not saying it's right, but I'd argue it's been an ongoing argument for a very long time that there's always, and people do still find a way. I mean, I suppose Sarah is saying as me, you do occasionally see those people that are out farming, have managed to achieve what they've achieved. And you think, how have they done it? Because the hard work they must have done to have got there. And you sort of sit there and you think, I'm probably too old now to be sort of doing things like that myself. But, you good on them. But you say it's not as easy as it is it? Because you say, like milk quotas have gone now. But now, as you say, not because of farming, but because of, solar panels, houses, whatever, the value of land has just skyrocketed.
Yeah, and I think some of the clever farmers or the clever first generational farmers that we're seeing them are sort of always getting on a bit of land and not just seeing the income, but seeing the asset value and building their asset value up at the same time as the income to then sell and go again to realize some of it. Otherwise, it's like Phil says, if you just try to do it out of income on the land that you've got, is extremely hard to sort of build asset value up.
I mean, you just think about, I mean, you mentioned a client earlier, Andrew, 150 cows and so on. I mean, you just think if you wanted to go into a farm, A, you've got to buy the farm, but B, you've then got to stock it, you've got to buy the machinery, you need working capital, all of these things. It just adds up to an incredibly large number. we all know, you can go to the bank, but the bank wants you to have generally a proof that you can earn money. So i.e. you've got a record. Okay, they might go off business plans. Even then, they're only going to lend you a percentage of the money you need to get going. And so the deposit you need to start with is a big sum of money. Well, where does that materialize from at the end of the day? So
I know. Again, I take back to like the farm I grew up on. I mean, the farmhouse itself sold for the same amount of money I had to pay for my house 7 years ago, which is just ridiculous when I look at the scale of housing. And it just shows how much things have moved on again, doesn't it? And say it makes me sound old, but I'm sounding like my parents go, my father, I remember when they brought that farm for £25,000.
Good old
I'll
days.
buy a lot for £25,000 anymore. And you're like, yeah, okay, Dad. Now I think I'm just bad.
Well, actually, can I go back to something you said a minute ago, Andrew? So in terms of divorce, because it's not a topic that everybody likes to talk around, but I mean, it is always a concern. I think I can think of two extreme cases where one said, well, I'll give it to the children. If they get divorced, that's their problem. Maybe you're annoyed their spouse so much that it's their own fault, or they picked the wrong one to start with. And another client who is sort of absolutely petrified of it, so just won't do anything. But we should say there are, the last few years in particular, there are now you can do what's called pre-nuptial and post-nuptial agreements, which, if done right, can help to protect some of the family inherited wealth. Will and I are not solicitors, we're not specialists in that, but sometimes it's just being open to have that discussion. It's quite a hard discussion to have, but if it is a concern and it's causing problems that they need to do to sort succession out, well, you've got to just get it on the table and talk about it.
Well, divorce like death is never an easy conversation. And as you say, if you're just about to marry someone, you've got to say, well, you've got to sign this agreement first. It doesn't always go down very well, does it? Let's be honest. But unfortunately, it's the world we live in, that these are the conversations you've got to have to protect the business moving forward.
Yeah. And the life insurance, sorry, the life insurance, again, Will and I have had conversations with many clients that they give the assets away to the younger generation. But we do then have to say, well, what happens if you have a sudden death to the younger generation? As bad as that is for every other level, it's also colossally bad from an inheritance tax perspective. So, that's where your life insurance for the younger generation, where they are now suddenly worth a lot of money, can be very, very valid, I think.
Well, if given that we're only 6 months away from less than that now, really, from the new rules kicking as it's 6th of April, whenever it is 2026, if people haven't done anything, what should they be doing? Because I mean, I know, again, I said, I'm trying not to make this political, but I know talking to a client, and it was, how's Nan? Oh, she's not too good. And she sat there thinking, maybe I should die before April because that's so I don't get dragged into these inheritance tax rules. And we've all heard stories about this in the press. And it's a very sad situation for us to be in. But it is the situation we'd be in. So, I mean, really, if people haven't done anything, what is your advice for people to do? It's got to be act. Surely talk and act has got to be what people have got to do from this.
Yes. Yeah, no, definitely. I think we've got a fairly robust structure that we sort of work through, but straight away you need to be making contact with your advisors, your accountants, solicitors, to understand who owns what, because a lot of farming families, it's just been in the assets, been in the family for generations, and they don't really know who owns what percentage of what field. That allows us to build a picture of value that will land in their estate, which we can then sort of estimate tax liabilities, which was then from that platform, we can then sort of look at different ideas to sort of reduce the inheritance tax. And that's where we talk about gifts and trusts and any sort of structure that suits that specific family. But until you actually have a look at it, you don't know if you've got a problem or not. For starters, because some people might not actually have a problem. And on the flip side of it, the ones who think, a lot of clients I've sat with through this process who say, I don't think I've got a problem, ended up having a problem anyway before April because of other assets they hold.
But it's like everything, you've got to quantify it first, haven't you?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah,
the first thing to do, as Willem said, is just to pick up the phone and talk to someone who probably knows what they're talking about, because the rules are complicated, and without being political, it doesn't really matter which political party it is. They're all very quick to chuck around figures, and so they'll suddenly start talking about a £3 million figure, for example. So if someone sat there and they're on their own and think, well, my farm's not worth £3 million, I haven't got an issue, but they forget that these numbers they're chucking around, there's lots of different little clauses that you've got to tick to get it. And also that figure's based on a couple, not on a single person. So there's so many little variances that they just got to pick up the phone and speak to someone.
It's the will point as well. That £3 million just assumes that you got your wills sorted and you're not passing everything over, because the £1 million not transferable in the finance bill, the draft finance bill that come out. So it's assuming a lot. That £3 million is just set up, and most people historically would just have mirrored wills that pass everything to each other, which historically has been fine. But now, if you exceed that £1 million, is sort of catching you out massive. It's £200,000 worth of tax that you're losing out on.
So a couple of times we've mentioned having that difficult conversation. Have either of you got any top tips as to how somebody within the farming family can actually just broach that subject? Have you got anything that you can, any gems of information you can share with us?
It's not just in farming, it's any families, isn't it? Let's be honest.
It's any difficult conversation, probably, Andrew, but any top tips that we can share?
My number one will be set a time where you can all sit down away from any distractions. I think it's very, very easy in families when you've got with grandchildren about and stuff like that to get together, but you're never going to talk about what's necessary. And that's with partners as well. I think you need to have that separate time when it's just the immediate family that needs to have a discussion about what's going on, with no partners, no children, unless the partners are part of it, I suppose is sort of it. But the people that it affects need to be sat around the table and just get the ball rolling.
That's a very sensible one, actually, because I know myself, I was asked to just help a client family, and that was a comment. And they said, oh, well, great, we get more together. So the grandparents now, but then the kids, and now they've got young grandchildren coming along as well. But we're not actually sitting down to have those business conversations. They become more of a social conversation. And it was that was sort of what I said to them, is, well, you need to make time when it is just you as the partners in the business. Now, who that happens to be, need to be just you. That's it. No distractions. That's it. And they went, yeah, that's the difficult thing, is trying to make that time. We say we're going to do it, but we never do, because the grandkids do this. So yeah, that's a great tip, definitely.
So I would completely echo that. I mean, because it's the thing that nobody wants to talk about. So if there's anything else remotely that you can talk about or avoid it, people do. So Willem and I will go to meetings. We'll say, yeah, we're coming to talk about the accounts, but also we're going to talk about succession. And then funnily enough, the people there, they let the accounts dominate the conversation until there's no time left to talk about the succession or something. So they just don't want to talk about it. But I think Willem's absolutely right. The second thing I would add is, I think people think it will be solved in one hit. Sometimes you have to have more than one conversation. It is generally, unless you've got very clear and easy ways of doing what you want to do, it is a progression sort of thing. And sometimes you might only solve an initial part of it, and you agree that actually the second part of it is really difficult to sort out. Let's go away and think about a few ideas and come back to the table. Because I think that's the problem. Everybody thinks, well, we'll sit down for a couple of hours and we'll have this grand plan worked out. And they don't understand the reason why they haven't discussed this is because it's an incredibly difficult subject sometimes. Sometimes the numbers and the assets and the people don't fit right, to be frank, and difficult decisions have to be made. So, yeah, I think that sometimes it's people's expectations. Sometimes you just got to get the problem out and aired, and you don't resolve anything initially, but you air the problem.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's huge, to be honest, because a lot of the stuff we've been doing recently feels very time pressured, and you cannot do it all. There's no way we're going to be able to do everything before April next year. We will get the best plan we can in place before April next year, but then we will not stop talking about it. It will be a continuous thing with clients. because it's just not easy. This stuff is not easy on a technical level, but also on an emotional level.
I've got a bit of a theory that it's sort of hand in hand really with business strategy. In theory, no business sets a strategy and then sticks with it. That strategy is ever evolving. And actually, for a farming business, as that strategy evolves, some of that succession planning will have to evolve alongside it. And therefore, they both almost need revisiting sort of in tandem rather than sort of as two separate things.
Yeah, well, your strategy, your business strategy should head on into your succession planning. Yeah, so I don't think you can have one without the other, quite frankly. Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. I'm just looking at the time now. Phil, we'll start with you. Any last sort of words of wisdom yourself? Any we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
That's a good question. I think we covered a lot of ground. I think you'll probably say we're bound to say this, bearing in mind it's our job, but I think it's just speak to people. So communication, it sounds pretty cheesy because everybody says it, but it is probably the most important thing. So communicate with the family members if you're able to do that. If you're not kind of able to have those conversations for whatever reason, communicate with a trusted advisor. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be an accountant or a solicitor. It can be anyone. It could be a trusted friend or whatever, but just engage that conversation to get it going. But you do need technical support. There are people who in their heads get succession right and they go and do it, and then the financial implications they haven't considered then just are an absolute car crash, and actually trying to put them right after the event is incredibly hard. And sometimes, we shouldn't let the tax dictate what happens, but it is a very important part of all these discussions, and doing it wrong can be extremely costly, is what I'd say. So communication is key, but communication with kind of within the family or non-family, if it's if you're in a business with friends or whatever, but communicate with the right people. And if you can't have those family discussions, don't be afraid to bring in, like you said, a mediator, facilitator, as you quite rightly say. But we covered quite a lot. We're trying not to be too technical in some of the stuff. We could talk about technical bits of trust and so on forever and a day, I'd say. But no, I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Good. Willem?
I think just adding to what Phil said, it is extremely important, I believe, at every farm, no matter your size, you have your own board table. And what that would be is you obviously your partners, but your accountant, financial planner, your solicitor, your land agent, those guys are involving everybody on those big decisions so that they're joined up, because sometimes you can end up going to a solicitor or an accountant and they're not talking to each other. Everyone's got to be playing. So building that board table and then using that board table, who they know everyone who they are, help make you make those decisions in the best way possible. You don't have to take their advice, but using it a bit more in the way that traditional business is done is farming it has to sort of be in that world these days, because it is too complex to sort of just have a go yourself.
Right, it is. It's having everybody try and pull in the same direction, isn't it? Because if you don't have the whole picture, you might not understand why somebody's made the decision that they've made to do it a particular way. Whereas if everyone's aware, then, oh, right, okay, not what I expected, but yes, I understand why that works.
Yeah, it's important.
And I just think we did say it a minute ago, but again, the not trying to take, you need to take action at bite-sized chunks some of the time. So sometimes people will say, well, we don't want to take any action until we got this complete worked up plan. But certainly from a tax perspective, I mean, I can think of one client up in Somerset where they're not ready to kind of do the succession in full, but they got quite a big farm, and they definitely knew they were going to give away a couple 100 acres to one of the sons. So I said, well, just get on and do that bit now. And just that itself, if the worst happens and you pass away, that will save a lot of inheritance tax, let alone kind of the full plan. So again, I think it's just having the conversations at the end of the day and not being afraid to voice your opinions.
Sarah?
I'm very much one for start with an action plan. And I think maybe it's step one is just thinking about reviewing your will, or if not, writing your will, and actually just start that action plan very small at that level to then move it forward from there.
Yeah. I mean, effectively, just think what you would like to happen, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, as you say,
I like that.
It's starting that. End of the day, the difficult bit is starting the conversations, isn't it? Once you've usually started them, they then roll on and it makes it easier. But the difficult bit usually is starting those initial conversations. So really, that's what's going to happen. As you say, if we've got to bring the facilitator to make them happen, make time for them to happen, not just think they're going to happen while you're having breakfast or whatever it is. You've got to put time aside to do it. So have those conversations. And then roll from there, have a plan of what you'd like to happen and bring in the advice to make sure it's going to happen in the right way, in the most cost-effective way, or whatever it happens to be, but it's to suit you and what you need as a family, as a business moving forward, so that you're not affected by a huge tax bill or whatever it is that cripples the business then to go forward. Because, people want to keep, a lot of farmers are there because they want to be farming, not worrying about usually this kind of stuff in the background. This has just got to happen, but it's not what should be driving the business in terms of a huge tax bill, whatever it happens to be. But otherwise, I'd like to say thank you very much to both our guests, Willem and Phil. It's been fantastic to have you. It's been an enjoyable hour, definitely. It's been a good conversation, and hopefully, as you said, Phil, we always try not to get too technical, just give people some things to think about and then go away and get their advice from whoever they deal with. So that's the whole point. So that's great, because you say, I think we could lose most people if we talked about trust too much. But no. So on that, I'd like to say thank you to you both. I guess it's a goodbye from me.
Thank you very much.
It's a goodbye from me too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Chewing the Cud podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. The information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness, or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses or products during this podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of Chewing the Cud Limited. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of Chewing the Cud Limited, and the views of Sarah Bolt are personal and may not be the views of Kingshay Farming and Conservation Limited and any affiliated companies. For more information on the podcast and details of services offered by Chewing the Cud Limited, visit www.chewingthecud.com. Thank you and goodbye.